Welcome to Facts for Real Videos. On March 11, 2011, one of the deadliest nuclear catastrophes in history occurred as a result of a sequence of events set off by the terrible Tohoku earthquake in Japan. Hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated from the plant site after the disastrous meltdown and accompanying explosions, which left it uninhabitable to this day. We'll go deeper into what happened before the Fukushima nuclear accident in this video, as well as what's being done now to make sure something similar never happens in the future. What followed the Second World War in Japan was nothing short of an economic miracle. Over the next 20 years, Japan's population and economy enjoyed remarkable expansion, despite the tragic loss of infrastructure and life at the end of the war. This expansion resulted in a rising need for electricity and power to maintain this burgeoning country. Japan's nuclear energy period began in 1955 when the Atomic Energy Basic Law was established, thanks in part to American influence. This law outlined the fundamentals for the use of nuclear power throughout the nation. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, situated in the sleepy seaside town of Okuma, is one of several nuclear establishments constructed in the 1960s as a consequence of Japan's determination to expand its nuclear energy industry. Fukushima Daiichi is the second most powerful nuclear facility in Japan, behind only Kashiwazaki, Kariwa, the largest and most powerful nuclear complex in the world, with a total power generating capacity of 4.7 gigawatts, across its 6 reactors. The capital city of Tokyo as well as the nearby areas of Miyagi, Tochigi, and Ibaraki are all powered by this facility. Because of its location at the meeting point of 4 tectonic plates, Japan experiences frequent and severe earthquakes and tsunamis, making it one of the world's most seismically active nations. As a result, the nation has some of the most stringent and exacting earthquake building regulations. Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the plant's owner and operator, had to ensure that Fukushima Daiichi's safety measures and apparatus met the most recent criteria during construction. The initial location of Fukushima Daiichi was a small hill rising 35 meters above sea level. This little hill was leveled and its height down to just 25 meters so that the plant's essential reactors could survive powerful earthquakes. This action was taken to ensure that the foundation of the construction would be placed on solid bedrock rather than on gravel and loose soil. 3. Because of the 6-meter seawall that was built to protect the plant, TEPCO believed that the site was safe from tsunamis during construction in the 1960s. 4. Only a few days prior to the earthquake, TEPCO sent a report to Japan's nuclear safety regulator outlining how easily the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant could be damaged by an earthquake that occurred in the same region in 1896. The study states that tsunamis with a magnitude of 7.2 might nearly double the height of the plant's existing barrier of protection. There could be very dire repercussions if this were to ever occur. A dreadful twist of fate came just 4 days later on March 11, 2011, when calamity struck in an incident that could only be termed as such. A magnitude 9.1 earthquake that caused shockwaves to travel beneath the water was caused by the Pacific Plate subducting beneath the Okhotsk Plate, 5, at precisely 2:46 p.m., somewhat over 70 kilometers off the eastern coast of the Japanese archipelago. Known by most as the Tohoku earthquake of 2011, this event is recognized as the 6th greatest earthquake in the world by magnitude and as the most potent and devastating earthquake in Japan's recorded history. It was stated that the strong earthquakes in the country's northern regions created waves as high as 40 meters. To put this into perspective, the height of these enormous waves would have been equivalent to a 12-story structure. In several places, the tsunami traveled up to 10 kilometers inland at a speed of up to 700 kilometers per hour. A total of over 1 million buildings and structures were either completely destroyed or partially damaged by the tragedy in the short time after the earthquake occurred. The majority of roads, railroads, and bridges, if they weren't already destroyed, were very impossible to cross due to the cold temperatures and snowfall that fell only minutes before and after the tsunami, which seriously hampered relief efforts. A total of over 1 million buildings and structures were either completely destroyed or partially damaged by the tragedy in the short time after the earthquake occurred. The majority of roads, railroads, and bridges, if they weren't already destroyed, were very impossible to cross due to the cold temperatures and snowfall that fell only minutes before and after the tsunami, which seriously hampered relief efforts. An estimated 20,000 people tragically perished in the aftermath of the tragedies, while over 450,000 more were forced to flee their houses after the tsunami entirely drowned or destroyed them. The worst was still to come, though. For the locals who lived close to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. PM 2:46. Within seconds of the initial tremors and vibrations detected at Fukushima Daiichi, reactors 1, 2, and 3 were immediately shut down. However, reactors 4, 5, and 6 were not in operation at the time since they were all undergoing repair. Luckily, this meant that reactor 4's fuel rods had already been taken out and deposited in what is known as a spent fuel pool, which is where nuclear power facilities like this one keep their spent fuel. In essence, this is a pool into which boron has been poured to maintain the fuel rod's coolness and stop nuclear reactions even after they have been used up. But eventually, this spent fuel pool turned out to be a significant issue. The entire power plant was cut off from the rest of the electrical grid by the magnitude of the tremors, but safety measures were specifically designed for situations like this. When a power outage like this occurred, backup generators started up right away and were in charge of keeping the reactors cool by circulating water. A catastrophic nuclear meltdown in the reactors would be possible if there wasn't a continuous flow of coolant. Reactor 1's emergency cooling system was automatically triggered 6 minutes later upon detecting an increase in pressure within the reactor vessel. This device is designed to automatically open a safety relief valve, releasing hot steam and preventing hazardous pressure builds-up that could cause a catastrophic explosion. PM 3:27. The facility's seawall of defense is struck by the first tsunami. The seawall effectively absorbed this first wave, preventing significant flooding from reaching the power plant. But shortly after, a backup condenser meant to cool the heated steam within Reactor 1's pressure vessel malfunctions. The steam temperature inside Reactor 1 keeps rising to unsafe levels in the absence of the system. PM 3:46. The power station is struck by a 14-meter tsunami, which is more than twice as tall as the seawall at the location. Exactly as described in TEPCO's assessment from 4 days ago, the tsunami fills the entire power plant right away, burying all but one of the facility's subterranean backup diesel generators, leaving them unusable. The plant's electrically powered safety systems all instantly shut down when the facility's power was cut off. Importantly, the majority of the backup core cooling systems were not functional. As workers at the plant hurried to find a solution, temperatures within the reactors quickly began to climb. A meltdown will unavoidably occur if they are unable to bring the reactor's power back online. 5 p.m. Reactor 1's water levels have dropped to extremely low levels, exposing the tops of the nuclear fuel rods to the atmosphere. When there is insufficient water available for cooling, the core reactor's temperature begins to rise. After learning about Fukushima Daiichi's condition, Japanese Prime Minister now declares a nuclear emergency an hour later. The public is reassured by government representatives that the declaration was merely a precautionary measure that was required because no radiation has been found and corrective action is being taken to address the issue. Now, 30 minutes after the announcement, Reactor 1's radioactive fuel is completely exposed to the atmosphere. The fuel rods heat up more and more in the absence of any water for heat to radiate through, until the fuel hits its own melting point. Nuclear catastrophe was only getting started. 9 p.m. Fearing a catastrophic explosion such to the one that occurred after the Chernobyl tragedy, the government orders everyone within 3 kilometers of the plant to evacuate. Those who were within 10 kilometers, however, were permitted to remain but were nonetheless urged to get ready for an evacuation. Nuclear catastrophe was only getting started. 9 p.m. Fearing a catastrophic explosion such to the one that occurred after the Chernobyl tragedy, the government orders everyone within 3 kilometers of the plant to evacuate. Those who were within 10 kilometers, however, were permitted to remain but were nonetheless urged to get ready for an evacuation. That evening, at 5:30 a.m., officials decide to release steam from Reactor 1 as temperatures and pressure inside the facility rise during the course of the night. This releases tiny amounts of radiation into the atmosphere for the first time since the crisis started. Due to the possibility of an unintentional explosion when the hydrogen caught fire after coming into contact with oxygen in the atmosphere, this choice was vitally important. Fortunately, the facility's emergency power was restored 20 minutes later, allowing employees to pump fresh water back into Reactor 1 and try to bring its temperature down to normal. Unbeknownst to the plant staff, the fuel rods within Reactor 1 have melted completely after an hour. An overabundance of hydrogen gas is produced inside the core of the vessel when the superhot fuel combines with the steam inside. 3 p.m. This means that everyone within 10 kilometers of Fukushima Daiichi is required to evacuate. 6 minutes later, The Reactor 1 building is rocked by a tremendous hydrogen explosion that destroys the containment vessel but leaves the reactor core intact. The explosion injured 5 workers at the plant. The mandatory evacuation zone was expanded to 20 kilometers later in the day. March 13, 02:42 a.m. Reactor 3's coolant injection system also malfunctions. The reactor's water level begins to drop as the extra heat causes it to gradually boil away. An accident having local repercussions. Level 4 International Nuclear and Radiological Event status was given to the explosion at Fukushima Daiichi Unit 1 later in the day. As the water levels continue to drop, at 7 a.m., the tops of the fuel rods within Reactor 3 are also open to the air. The fuel rods start to melt 2 hours later because of the high temperatures. There is currently a reactor core that is perilously near to blowing up. March 14th, 11th, 1 a.m. For International Nuclear and Radiological Event status was given to the explosion at Fukushima Daiichi Unit 1 later in the day. As the water levels continue to drop, at 7 a.m., the tops of the fuel rods within Reactor 3 are also open to the air. The fuel rods start to melt 2 hours later because of the high temperatures. There is currently a reactor core that is perilously near to blowing up. March 14th, 11th, 1 a.m. Reactor 3 collapses as a result of an overabundance of hydrogen gas and pressure inside the reactor, which causes another explosion to rock the plant. The explosion injured 11 people, and also destroyed crucial pipes that supplied water to Reactor 2. TEPCO reports that neither of the 2 explosions released any radioactive material. 2:15 p.m. The cooling system of Reactor 2 malfunctions, causing the water levels to drop, as was previously the case with Reactors 1 and 3. The fuel rods within Reactor 2 are fully exposed to the atmosphere by 8 p.m. Now, a third breakdown is unavoidable. A third explosion destroys the region above the reactor and Reactor 4's spent fuel pool by 6 in the morning the following day. Later on, a fire breaks out at the same spot, releasing radioactive materials into the surrounding area at dangerously high amounts. Seawater is continuously pumped into Units 1, 2, and 3 for the remainder of the day in an attempt to potentially stabilize the temperatures of the cores. In a last-ditch effort to save the situation, the Japanese Self-Defense Force even deployed helicopters to drop seawater onto Unit 3 on March 17. Noteworthy is the fact that the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami was still being felt throughout the rest of Japan while TEPCO and government representatives worked feverishly to limit the situation at Fukushima Daiichi. The destruction of numerous important infrastructure pieces, like bridges and highways, caused the rescue and relief efforts to go more slowly. 9 days after the earthquake, on March 20th, replacement diesel generators were finally delivered at reactors 5 and 6, and the next day they were finally brought to a cold shutdown. Power was eventually restored to Reactors 1 and 2 for the first time that same day. But even with these encouraging advances, the surrounding lands and seas had already suffered harm. The destruction of numerous important infrastructure pieces, like bridges and highways, caused the rescue and relief efforts to go more slowly. 9 days after the earthquake, on March 20th, replacement diesel generators were finally delivered at reactors 5 and 6, and the next day they were finally brought to a cold shutdown. Power was eventually restored to Reactors 1 and 2 for the first time that same day. But even with these encouraging advances, the surrounding lands and seas had already suffered harm. One is that significant amounts of radioactive material, including iodine, 131, cesium, 134, and cesium, 137, were discharged into the atmosphere during the incident when the reactors vented. Additionally, TEPCO later disclosed in 2013 that radioactive material had been detected in tap water and agricultural products in a few isolated cases, indicating that contaminated groundwater had been continuously seeping into the Pacific Ocean since the accident. According to a 2013 WHO research, a segment of the population residing in the Fukushima prefecture had a much increased lifetime risk of acquiring thyroid cancer than did residents of other places. Due to high radiation levels, more over 200 square kilometers of land surrounding Fukushima Daiichi are still classified as a nuclear exclusion zone. Access to these areas is banned for citizens. 12 years after the tragedy, there is still a lot of work to be done at Fukushima Daiichi to minimize radioactive contamination. The plant's decommissioning is expected to take an additional 30 to 40 years and cost tens of billions of dollars. Eliminating spent nuclear fuel from reactor cores is a critical component of the Fukushima disaster cleanup. By 2021, all of the spent fuel from reactors 3 and 4 has been effectively removed. It is anticipated that work on removing the spent fuel assemblies from reactors 2 and 1 will start in the fall of 2023 and 2027, respectively. In the meantime, reactors 5 and 6 escaped significant harm and have been effectively closed since 2011. TEPCO installed radioactive water treatment equipment a few months after the accident, enabling the radioactive water to be removed from the site and decontaminated. The nuclear facility has too much wastewater, though, and they run out of space to keep it despite their best efforts. To the public's dismay, the Japanese government did, in April 2021, finally authorize TEPCO's 30-year plan to dump the water into the Pacific Ocean. According to some experts, this action may have long-term effects on the local fishing business in the area as well as marine species. The ocean will gradually dilute the poured water, according to the Japanese cabinet. Many nuclear safety lessons that were learned from the Fukushima nuclear accident are now being applied not only in Japan but throughout the rest of the world. For starters, many nuclear reactors now have essential emergency systems installed that run off electricity. Additionally, having a sufficient stock of backup batteries in case of power disruptions has become industry standard. It is now mandatory for backup diesel generator rooms to be blast-resistant and waterproof. How do you feel about Japan's handling of the Fukushima meltdown? What do you believe they could have improved upon? Tell us in the comments section below. We appreciate your time and we'll see you in the upcoming video. Tell us in the comments section below. We appreciate your time and we'll see you in the upcoming video.